Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, Mr. Fused Fiction Hub, bringing you another amazing story. This is the next part of the story, 2 Feet Short by Garrett Wellist. Chapter 8. Despite already knowing about his condition, many of the students in the math class he taught with ectoplasm couldn't resist voicing their admiration. The girl sitting closest to him swooned, eyes turning to hearts. A quirk called emotion emphasis was to blame for that but held back from reaching out to touch him. He was still their teacher after all. A few of the boys held back their laughter, similar to the way Nomasa did. It was strange, being adored again. He had gotten used to people jumping when they saw him out of the corner of their eye, scaring children away from the sidewalk. He had to admit, he kind of liked the change. All Might Sensei, you're just so cute, young Amira squealed, her multi-jointed fingers writing several things down with her colorful arrangement of pens. She had refused to let the entire class leave at one point until each and every pen was found. Thank you. He felt heat rush to his cheeks and hoped he wouldn't have to leave for being such a distraction. All Might Sensei, is this really what you looked like when you were a kid? A very enthusiastic young man asked, a slight blush coming to his cheeks as he continued. Who knew such a small kid would turn out to be too beefy? I mean, thick. No, strong. He was all red from embarrassment, much like Toshinori was. Did his students really think of him as beefy? Once the roar of laughter faded, Ectoplasm stood at the front of the class. Please settle down. We have a lot to go over, and if we can get through today's lesson without interruptions, then maybe we can let you ask All Might some questions. He turned his attention to Toshinori, asking for permission. Of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions. He gave his signature smile and peace sign, gaining another wave of AOS. The lesson began with a quick review of last night's homework, a few asking to go over specific problems. He stayed out of the way for most of it. Once that was finished, Ectoplasm handed him a stack of papers to pass out. The words APOP was bold on the front. These poor kids. As if on cue, a chorus of groans drew out of the many students. As he passed out papers, he heard a few curse silently, others grabbed their hair in frustration, muttering, did he even teach us that yet? But the majority got straight to work. He gave a particularly stressed student a silent A+ Ultra and a wink to try and motivate them. Ectoplasm took the time to grade a few sheets of homework that had been passed up, and Toshinori waited patiently for them to finish. He hoped he could go home tonight. He was starting to miss his now unnecessarily large bed and collection of movies. He could also take some time to go grocery shopping. It did hurt to get some good food while he could eat it. He had no grading to do, so his evening was open. From what he could tell, popcorn sounded good. American-style pizza sounded better. Both pizza and popcorn sounded like heaven on earth, and maybe he could throw in a pint of ice cream. He really missed eating real food. A hand raising caught his attention and he hurried over to gather it, giving young Matano a doubt thumbs up and a wide smile. He placed it on Ectoplasm's desk, who nodded and whispered a thanks. More hands began to raise as more finished. He collected each and made sure to add an encouraging gesture with it. The rest of the lesson continued on without incident. Most everyone stayed focused, kept their focus on the lesson and Ectoplasm. It was nice, being back with his students. Well, Ectoplasm students. He had only been assigned to the first-year hero classes. Nezu mentioned him teaching a history of heroics class. Considering the research he had done on early heroes and the way he himself had affected heroes, it was a good idea and a comfortable topic with him. Toshinori wondered if he would still get the chance to teach that class. Once this whole mishap blew over, there was no if about it. Finish the remaining problems as homework. Now, I will open the floor for your questions about All Might. Ectoplasm gathered his notes, erased the front board and sat down, continuing his grading from earlier. With a slightly nervous smile, Toshinori walked into the front of the classroom, looking at each excited face. Judging from the questions and comments he received earlier, it was going to be quite interesting. Once everyone packed away their pencils and papers, hands began shooting up. So many beaming faces looked back at him, hoping to be chosen first. His years of working in the media made the guilt of neglected questions subside. Everyone will have their turn. Patience is a virtue after all. He started on a young man with a big tooth quirk. Has Midnight Sensei ever tried to hit on you? She always says she had a big crush when she was our age. Was this where they wanted to go? Oh boy, did she now? He laughed away the awkward feeling. Well, if she has, I hadn't noticed. I prefer to think of her as a co-worker and friend rather than a potential broken bar lover, flirting mate, trying to seduce him, anything else. He finished dumbly. At least it was vague enough to keep suspicion away. Continuing on, he pointed to the girl who sat next to him, having a simple scales quirk. Is that kid Izuku Midoriya your son? The first years started a rumor about it. Oh, would that mean that you're kinda like his son now? That one was unexpected. Even the second years noticed his favoritism. Not a good sign. Or maybe class 1A was just loud. I don't have any biological children. A few hands fell at that. What? And no, he is not my father simply because our ages are reversed. Another hand fell. He ignored it and pointed to someone else. "How old are you, All Might Sensei?" she asked politely. A better turn in conversation. "I assume I'm about 12 years old." He took another look at himself, making sure it hadn't changed since he last checked. It wasn't a completely irrational worry. "If you're younger than us, then why do you say a young before addressing us?" He hadn't really thought about it. Well, he had for Izuku since the man had turned into a less young version of himself. It felt wrong to address anyone else differently though. They hadn't changed and he didn't either. Mentally, he was still an old man at heart and in mind. He just looked young. That wouldn't be a good argument in a court case. Thankfully this wasn't one, although it was just as tense. "I didn't care to change my way of addressing my students." He gave them a shy smile and rubbed at his neck. "If you'd prefer I simply use your name then I can. It may take a little while to break the habit." Old dogs and not learning tricks. He found it applied to him with everything that wasn't heroics. "Oh, no, it's okay. I was just curious." She and a few others were quick to reassure him. Only a few hands remained and one was for permission to get a drink. The last two were from two boys. One had eyes that change color according to his emotions. A difficult quirk to have when dealing with business, but he was quite the thinker. He often talked about starting a business that hires only foreigners and those without homes. A risky decision, but he was smart enough to figure it out. The other was a tall man that took more of an intimidation approach to business. He was often mistaken for a heroics student by those looking to sponsor him. He had longer hair, tied into a neat bun on the back of his head. He had the ability to grow an extra finger on any part of his body. Not a particularly helpful quirk, but an interesting one all the same. Toshinori decided on the eye-color changing boy. "All Might Sensei, how long will you be stuck like this?" he asked with a serious tone, but his eyes betrayed his excitement. "Well, I'm not completely sure right now. It's a work in progress, trying to find the reason I'm like this in the first place, and even with that information, it could be a while until we manage to reverse it." The from earlier returned and he noted to apologize to Namasa later. With a small nod, he turned to the last student. "Last question for the day." He smiled and readied himself. He hoped this one wouldn't be a difficult question. "You said earlier that you don't have a biological child. Does that mean that you could have an adoptive child?" So much for not asking difficult questions. Well number. "I don't have a legal child," he tried to correct. "But you have a child?" he pressed. Was he trying to make this as awkward as possible? It's a difficult question to answer. "No, I don't have any biological or adoptive children. I'm not fostering and I doubt I would be able to, but sometimes I feel like a father." That's the best I can explain it. He was really sharing a lot, now that he was in retirement and the world knew he was a creepy skeleton. Or at least he used to be one. "So your favoritism for Izuku Midoriya is just you trying to ask as a father for him?" "I'm not sure if I can disclose that information to you." "Yes." He pulled the its classified card. He didn't want the entire school teasing his poor boy over this. A gasp came from the front desk and the multi-jointed girl raised her hand again. She didn't wait for him to call on her before asking, "All Might Sensei, do you have a spouse?" What was with these questions? Why would you ask that? He raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's a popular question with you especially. The media has never mentioned you having one, other than some stupid rumors about other heroes that's too far-fetched to be true." "So do you have one?" He cleared his throat and sighed. There was no benefit to lie to them. Besides, it wouldn't really change much if the media did catch mind of it. "No, I do not." A few girls gasped. "Not even a lover, a boyfriend or girlfriend?" "No one?" She sounded desperate, as if the fact that he ate, slept and lived alone was impossible. Sure, it was a lonely lifestyle, not suited for most people, but the threats kept him alone. How could he even begin to explain the dangers that came with being his spouse? Even being a close friend was dangerous on its own. His life was built around a tower of lies and he was getting tired of keeping the foundation stable. "No, I am thoroughly single." "There's no way. You're the symbol of peace, Japan's top bachelor and arguably the hottest hero to exist." He blushed at the last one. How could you still be single? How had this information caused more of an uprise than the rest of the private information he'd given out? "I decided at a younger age to keep to myself." Being a hero has its downfalls. "What about now? Do you plan on dating anyone now that you're retired?" How was he supposed to explain the level of damage he'd taken from the battles that left him weak and useless? Not only physically, but mentally. Both he and Chio knew how messed up he was. He was literally saved by the bell. A few students waved on their way out and any who tried to stay for more questions were shooed out my ectoplasm. Once everyone had left, heading to their next class for the day, the duplicating math teacher turned to him, his expression impossible to read. "I didn't know you would be so open. I think it helps your students to learn from you when you're honest." He wasn't sure how to take that, but he wasn't given much time to ponder on it. He had to get to the training grounds to help the heroics classes. Izuku had improved a shocking amount between the 2 days he'd been out of classes. Toshinori wasn't sure whether to blame the age change or his own neglect. Surely his boy hadn't been getting stronger without him even noticing. Maybe he had asked another teacher for help. That would explain it. Toshinori stood next to Aizawa, watching the class work on yet another rescue scenario. Ever since the hero licensing exam, they had worked on rescuing. In each attack from the League of Villains, they hadn't had to worry about civilian interference and focused on either escaping or defeating them. Civilians made everything harder. As they stood, Izuku was pulling a car from the deep water, keeping his classmates, the traumatized civilians, from drowning. Each of them had a gas mask, but once one was above their head, a meter would start counting. If it reached 2 minutes, they failed. Team 1 consisted of young Shoji, Sero and Ashido. Tokoyami, Kirishima, Hagakure and Kodo were their civilians. Team 2 consisted of no longer young Izuku, Aoyama and Asui. Their civilians were young Yaozu, Sao, Ojiro, and Roraka. The last 6 students waited their turns. Even as a mock rescue scene, he could see some of the students get stressed as civilians. It only motivated the heroes further. In Team 2, Izuku held the car out of the water while Aoyama and Asui tried to pull their classmates out of the car without making the car sink further. It was a tricky situation, but all the better for their development. Toshinori had never gotten the chance to see Izuku after the meeting and felt bad for leaving, but he could make up for that later. He added it to the list. In a matter of seconds, the car was lifted into the air, Izuku's strong body seeming to hold it up easily. He wore a bright smile and set the car down on dry land easily. The blonde distinctly remembered him not being able to do that. Aizawa seemed to agree, making a surprised noise and writing something down. One for all flared and danced around his limbs before cracking out of sight. The civilians were easily rescued and he saw the blushing looks a few of the girls gave him. Laughing loud enough for both teachers to hear, he waved his arm and blushed himself. Still such a teenager. Toshinori had regrettably only focused on Izuku through the entire exercise, which made Aizawa glare at him after reading his notes. He would likely get lectured about favoritism later. Rushing over to a wet and sweaty Izuku, the blonde pulled at his uniform and smiled. "Hey, All Might." He looked around awkwardly. "I just wanted to apologize, my boy." Strong emotions are hard to suppress with all of these crazy hormones. He tried for humor. It didn't quite reach the other man. "Hey, you did pretty great out there, my boy." Lifting that car is a big step forward. All Might a broken bar. Izuku looked at him in the eyes, a sad expression painting his features. "It's easier." He said it like a kid would say a bad word. "What do you mean, my boy?" "What's easier?" "Lifting cars, obviously. Using one for all is easier. I didn't even have to worry about breaking my bones again. Didn't even think a broken bar." He sighed before continuing. "All Might, I've never been close to lifting a car before, but it was too easy, like picking up an egg." What was with him an egg? Shaking the thought away, he studied the taller man's face. "You didn't expect this change to make using one for all easier?" He tried to guess. "It doesn't make sense. I know just as much about one for all as I did before this change, but now I can lift cars and who knows what else I can do." He was starting to cry now, his body shaking. "Izuku, this isn't as strange as you may think. You're stronger. Your body is used to one for all in ways you can't understand. You just have to trust yourself, my boy." He tried for a pat on the head but couldn't reach that high. "All Might, I'm not sure if if I'm really used to this quirk now. If I can use it without hurting myself, then I don't know if if I want to go back to the way I was." Thanks for listening to this tale. Make sure you comment, like and subscribe and have a wonderful day.